There was a 73-year-old woman who was just recently released from a California state prison. Her name was Leslie Van Houten. She had been locked up in there for 53 years. And big reason of why she was in there was because of one person besides herself. And that was this man, Charles Manson. Charles Manson was born Charles Maddox, November 12, 1934, to a 15-year-old girl named Ada Kathleen Maddox. Records show his father may have been a man named Colonel Walker Henderson Scott Sr. Scott is one of those guys. He was known as a con man around town. He worked at the local mill. Now, Manson's mother raised him by herself. He never really got to know his biological father. So a few months before Charlie was born, his mother actually married a man named William Eugene Manson. Now, they were together for a few years. Charlie's mom had a bad habit of sneaking out at night drinking. She would leave Charlie with just random babysitters. And eventually, William Eugene Manson got sick of it and asked for a divorce, said she was neglecting her duties as a mother. So they separated. Now, she would be in and out of jail, getting in trouble with her brother, because all these crazy things they would do. Charlie would end up moving with his aunt and uncle in West Virginia. But he would keep the Manson name for the rest of his life. So it was around age 9 when Charlie started getting in trouble. He was starting fires at school, truancy, even doing petty theft. But it was around 16 when he would start going to jail for the first time. He would end up in prison a few times after that. So when Charlie got out of prison in 1967, he ended up moving out to San Francisco, California. He started hanging out with a lot of the youth around the city. He developed a following, and in 1968, that following turned into what he called the family. He had over 100 followers. Most of them were very impressionable young girls, and they loved Charlie, and they would do anything for him. So while Manson was in prison, one of the many times, he learned to read music and play guitar. So when he was out, he really wanted to be a musician. So he ended up getting an audition with a man named Terry Melcher. Terry Melcher was the son of Doris Day. He was also good friends and the producer for the 1960s popular band, the Beach Boys. He was living with a man named Roman Polanski at the time, who was a very big director in the movie industry. He really never had any interest ultimately in signing Manson. So Manson allegedly would record some music. He would do it at a home studio of Dennis' brother, Brian Wilson. Later on, the Beach Boys would release a song written by Manson. The song was called Cease to Exist. They would later change the name of the song to Never Learn Not to Love. They would release it on their 1969 album, 2020, on the B-side as a single. Now, the Beach Boys would never give Manson credit for writing the song, and this infuriated him. So August 9th, 1969, Charles Manson would gather a small group of his followers, and he would tell them they were going to go out and carry out a massacre on Hollywood's elite, the beautiful people in Hollywood. He sent out a Charles Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, Susan Atkins, and Linda Kasabian. He would send them north of Beverly Hills to 10050 Cielo Drive. This house belonged to Roman Polanski. And to him, to Manson, this house represented the showbiz world rejecting him. As the 4 members of the Manson family arrived to Cielo Drive that evening, they would pull up to the front gate, turn the car off, and wait. At that same time, there was a young man by the name of Stephen Parent. He was leaving the house after a night of hanging out with good friends, having a good time. He was coming down the driveway to leave. It was at that moment when the Manson family members saw him. Tex Watson jumped over the fence, walked up to him, and shot him dead. This absolutely horrified Kasabian. So as they went up to the house, she stood outside and kept watch as they went in. She would also be the getaway driver. Side note, Kasabian would end up being a big star witness when the Manson trial started. So the other 3 members of the Manson family would enter the house, and they would start to attack the 4 people that were inside. Those 4 people were Sharon Tate, Roman Polanski's pregnant wife, Wojciech Ranowski, Abigail Folger, and Jay Sebring. They would brutally murder the 4 people inside. After they were done, they took Tate's blood, and they would write the word pig on the front door with it. They left and they got back to Manson, excited to tell him what happened. But Manson wasn't too happy. In fact, he was critical and very upset because of how sloppy it was. So after what happened on Cielo Drive, Charles Manson himself would gather 3 of his family members, Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, and drive them to the Los Feliz address of Alino and Rosemary LaBianca. They would enter the house and brutally murder the couple to a very similar fashion of what they did the night before on Cielo Drive. Do you want to know the crazy thing? The Manson family was arrested, but nothing to do with the murders. They were arrested because they had vandalized a national park. And while they were in the police department, it was Susan Atkins' confession that brought it all out. Because she was being investigated for suspicion of the murder of a man named Gary Hinman. And just because of that, they got the confession on what happened with the other murders. So there you have it. The Manson family was locked up, and they stayed locked up. Even though initially they weren't in jail because of the murders, they stayed there because of the murders. You know, people like Tex Watson, who is 77 years old now, he's still serving time for what happened back in 1969. Susan Atkins, she was 61 when she died in prison in 2009. Patricia Krenwinkel, 75 years old, still serving her time for what happened in 1969. Charles Manson, the mastermind, he was 83 years old when he died in prison in 2017. Now the one I say for last is the one I mentioned at the beginning, Leslie Van Houten. As of 2 weeks ago, she's a free woman. At 73 years old, after serving 53 years in prison, she's out. She finally got paroled out. After many denials and rejections from the governor and the parole board, she's out. So what do we honestly want to think about Leslie Van Houten being released? You know, on one hand, she committed this horrendous crime. She should have been locked up. On the other hand, she was 19 years old, heavily influenced by drugs, and heavily influenced by a much older man who just brainwashed people into doing what he wanted. Does that justify it? Hell no. But there's factors. I think we're all human. We're all capable of doing things that are bad, and we're all capable of doing things that are good. You know? But in the end, she's out. Let her live the rest of her life, however long that is. The rest of them, whatever happens to them happens. But I know one thing. There's bad people around every corner. They're all over. You know, we can't do nothing about that. Shouldn't stop us from living our lives. Can't live in fear. We gotta live. So, please like this video and subscribe in memory of those that were lost. We should never forget them, and I know we never will. The name Charles Manson will always be integrated with American history in a negative way. The Manson family as well. But like I always say, you never know what day is going to be the last. You got to go and do the things you want to do. You got to see the places you want to see. And you got to meet the people you want to meet. So just remember, dream big, everybody. Thank you for watching. Until next time, take care of yourself.